Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, in Europe, support for Palestine is growing from the bottom up. How the people are forcing their elected leaders to take a stand against Israel's war on Gaza. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, if you're watching us on YouTube or Spotify, please leave us a comment and tell us what you think about this episode and what stories you want us to do next.
I'm Alys Samson Estapé. I'm based in Barcelona. I'm part of the coalition Stop Complicity with Israel in Catalonia at a Spanish state level and member as well of the campaign Stop the Arms Trade with Israel.
So, Alys, let's start off with the newsy stuff, because to be sure, we've seen a few developments at the governmental level when it comes to Palestine. Many countries are recognizing or moving towards recognizing Palestinian statehood this week at the UN.
I state clearly, as Prime Minister of this great country, that the United Kingdom formally recognizes the State of Palestine.
Canada is officially recognizing the State of Palestine and ramping up pressure for a two-state solution.
The Commonwealth of Australia recognises the State of Palestine.
And other European states will reportedly follow suit. On top of that, the European Commission has just put forward unprecedented measures, including proposals to partially suspend trade concessions and target certain Israeli ministers and settlers. Can you walk us through some of these moves, and do you think they'll have real-world effects that will represent real progress?
So I think the main take is that the pressure that civil society is putting is having an effect. So these governments aren't out of the blue deciding to recognize the state of Palestine. This is because civil society have been organizing tirelessly in order to demand accountability for Israeli crimes throughout Palestine. So this proves that governments are feeling the pressure and are feeling that they have to do something. Now, recognizing the Palestinian state is not a demand that will help stop Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. Only binding measures that put an end to Israeli impunity and to Israel's crimes over the Palestinian people can actually stop what is happening on the ground, what Israel is doing with international states and international companies' complicity. But it does send us the message that we are managing to push states, even governments that are super complicit, like the UK government that has been criminalizing groups such as Palestine Action and repressing really harshly activists that are trying to put an end to this complicity.
These protesters are taking a risk. They're marching against a decision by the UK government to ban the activist group Palestine Action. Anyone supporting the group could be imprisoned for up to 14 years.
So I think what we need to take from it is that our organizing is working, but we need to increase it much more.
Yeah. How's this working at the EU level? Because it's a conglomeration of these member states, and each member state has a different take on the issue. How do you think that the EU is managing all of that?
Well, the EU is a superstructure that it's designed in a way where it's almost impossible for any change to happen, right? Because there's so many different bodies that need to make decisions and need to agree on it. But again, I think that the fact that super Zionist Ursula von der Leyen did the speech she did shows that things are changing.
We will stop all payments in these areas without affecting our work with Israeli civil society or Yad Vashem. Second, we will make two further proposals to the Council. We will propose sanctions on the extremist ministers and on violent settlers.
I think it's important to remember that the EU is the biggest trade partner with Israel right now. So The EU is directly contributing to finance what Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur of Palestine, has labeled as an economy of genocide. So the EU, throughout its member states, is directly contributing to finance this genocide against the Palestinian people, because not only Israel isn't facing any sanctions, but Israel is treated as a preferential partner, receiving preferential treatment when it comes to trade agreements. So the fact that the European Commission has voted on this is a sign that things are changing.
It does seem inconsistent across the board. For example, maybe you could clear this up. The UN said last week that the situation in Gaza meets the threshold of genocide. But the EU has so far refused to use the term, even though it's proposing partial sanctions to Israel and most of these extremist ministers. And Teresa Ribera, who is the vice president of the European Commission, she did call it genocide, only to then have the European Commission's spokesperson throw cold water on those comments. So why the reluctance to use the term genocide?
Well, as I say, the EU is an enabler of this genocide. Israel cannot commit this genocide on its own. Israel only commits this genocide against the Palestinian people thanks to international complicity and to impunity that it's granted on an international level. So the EU is directly involved in this genocide. So for the EU to admit this would be to admit its responsibility. I think we need to acknowledge this. Like it would have been impossible to imagine Ursula von der Leyen saying this some months ago, but it's still wildly insufficient because this is not responding to actually stopping Israel's impunity, and it's not translating into material changes on the ground.
Yeah, as you said, things are happening. We're seeing this kind of rising tide across Europe. Civil society mobilizing and standing for Palestine in these concerts, in advocacy, in protests. For example, last week, Together for Palestine, a benefit concert at London's Wembley Arena, raised more than £1.6 million for organizations helping Palestinians. Earlier this month in Brussels, tens of thousands of protesters flooded the streets wearing red to symbolize this red line against genocide in Gaza. I mean, the list goes on, Alys, and I wonder what this feels like as an organizer, because the momentum is there, the passion is there. How do you then harness it and translate it into action?
I think you mentioned a very important word here, which is organizing. And this is something that the media tends to forget, right? Many times when there's victories that are achieved, it suddenly is, oh, this government has decided that, this company has decided that. No, there's a lot of invisible organizing, a lot of work that happens behind closed doors. Civil society has been working tirelessly for Palestinian rights in the last months, but for decades, because as we know, all of this didn't start in October 2023. So I think what we're seeing is a wider divide between what the streets are saying and then what institutions are doing. But the fact that, as we're saying now, even the most complicit institutions, such as the UK government, are starting to take some very timid measures means that they're starting to feel this pressure. And what we need to do is we need to make it unsustainable for these institutions to keep on being complicit.
Yes. And also to match the words you're hearing with action. For example, in your home country of Spain has announced 9 measures regarding Israel.
It includes a complete permanent embargo on the sales of weapons to Israel and also a ban on ships that could carry fuel for Israel. They are not allowed to be docking in Spanish ports anymore. And also aircrafts that could carry arms and weapons for Israel are aimed to be banned.
How credible and enforceable do you think these are in practice?
Well, unfortunately, in Spain, our government has been lying many times, so it's very difficult to believe what the government's words actually are. Across all over the Spanish state, people have been tirelessly organizing, mobilizing for Palestinian rights for the last 2 years nonstop. We've even been protesting in 100 cities in the same weekend, demanding for the Spanish government to put an end to military and all other ties with Israel. Now, we've managed to create a climate where it's very difficult for the Spanish government to not impose an arms embargo on Israel. There are two things here. One, the first is that the government has lied since the beginning. I think the first time they publicly said that there were no military relations between Spain and Israel was December 2023. But public data, their own public data, shows the total opposite. So even in this announcement that you just mentioned some days ago, the government said that actually this new measures that they're going to impose is just a way of binding a military embargo that de facto already exists. But again, public data shows that actually from February to May 2025, Spain was the biggest importer of weapons from Israel of the EU. That is intolerable, so shameful. This means that the government is using our public taxes to finance the genocide against the Palestinian people. So what's happened now, and we've been working tirelessly with many different groups from civil society, trade unions, artists, and the government is feeling the heat. So they came out with this announcement, but they have not declared any binding measures. So de facto, and this is important, people know this because there's a lot of, there are not very accurate representations of what's happening in Spain. Right now, 22nd of September, there is no military embargo on Israel. So on Tuesday, there will be another Council of Ministers where they have another chance to approve the military embargo to Israel by royal decree. Let's hope that this one is finally approved. But until we see this text, we won't be able to know what exactly does this military embargo mean. And what civil society we're calling for is that this has to be a full military embargo. This means it has to include imports, export, transit. It needs to affect both private and public contracts, because right now the Spanish government has 46 contracts with Israeli military companies that, of course, these need to be put to an end. It has to be transparent, and it also has to be retroactive. So again, these are signs that what we're doing is working. It's having an effect, but it's insufficient. So we need to increase the pressure.
We'll have more with Alys after this break.
Esmond Bradley Martin, one of the world's leading investigators of the illegal poaching trade, was murdered in his own home in Nairobi, Kenya in 2018. To this day, nobody knows who killed Esmond or why. Was it because of his work, or was it a different reason altogether? Hear from Esmond's friends and colleagues in True Crime Reports.
So, Alys, Spain has a reputation for being one of the most pro-Palestinian in Europe, at least the Spanish people.
Barcelona has showed up in such a beautiful way. I have so much love for the people of Spain as we go to help the starving population of Palestine.
Spanish people are also some of the most sports-obsessed in all of Europe. I think that's fair to say at this point. That's become a crucial source of leverage in itself, right? Because just last week, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez called for a sports ban for Israel.
Therefore, our position is clear and firm. Until the barbarity ends, neither Russia nor Israel should be in any international competition anymore.
Now, this comes off the heels of a famous cycling race, which is called La Vuelta a España, continually disrupted by protesters due to the participation of an Israeli cycling team. And it's to the point where the final stage in Madrid was completely derailed.
Yes, Spain is a country that really loves sports. And precisely from this love of sports comes the idea that genocide cannot be a part of sport. So La Vuelta is a private cycling competition. It's run by the same company that also runs the Tour de France. So this year La Vuelta started in Italy, and colleagues have been coordinating since the start in Italy, throughout Spain, reaching out, before La Vuelta started, reaching out to all the actors involved. And I think this is so important when we talk about sports washing, is that Israel dedicates millions and millions of euros and dollars to try to cover its crimes over the Palestinian people, and to just present itself as another country that is part of these races, and to try to win legitimacy. But we're at a time where people won't buy this anymore. So people, in seeing that La Vuelta has not taken any measures, people very inspiringly have organized and have just been outside of the race, just holding flags and signs and demanding that this team is not part of the race, and saying that these races should not continue functioning normally in the presence of a state that is representing a genocidal state.
Yeah, and it's not completely unprecedented. You see this in soccer. In UEFA has kicked Russia out of its confederation, but it's not done anything with Israel. So this is a real source of leverage.
Well, and just the example of how states all around the world, competitions, private events, etc., have responded so differently to Russia's invasion of Ukraine than to the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. And let's remember, decades of Israeli oppression against the Palestinian people can only be understood because we live in a profoundly colonial and racist world. But this different reaction, right, is just so painful, because you can, many times, those of us who've been organizing for years, when we reach out to companies or to events, they'll say, oh, this is very difficult, we should not mix sports and politics. But then you see how different they've reacted in the case of Russia. And what we say is that Israel does make sure that politics and sports are mixed in order to try to cover its crimes over the Palestinian people. And this is what's totally intolerable.
Right. And the International Cyclists Union said in a letter that Spain was not ready to hold big sporting events because it couldn't ensure the safety of its competitors. And then it goes a step further, saying that Spain's attitude when Pedro Sanchez lauded the protesters was going, quote, against the Olympic spirit.
Could I just add that what goes against the Olympic spirit is genocide? And I think that we should make that clear. So it's Israel in the first point that is going against the Olympic spirit. That's why Israel should be expelled from the Olympics and all other sports events.
So, Alys, I wonder if we could just take a second to remind people what is motivating all of this. Israel's war on Gaza has killed more than 65,000 people. And the UN Special Rapporteur said last week that there may be up to 680,000 civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. It's just unimaginable. And it appears that just the scale of this has reached a breaking point where business as usual is just no longer an option. And in Europe, that's manifesting in a number of ways. And it's not just sports, but also entertainment. Several countries, including Spain, the Netherlands, Ireland, Slovenia, and Iceland, have all pledged that they won't participate in the Eurovision Song Contest if Israel is allowed to compete. This is potentially huge for anyone who knows Eurovision. Give me your take on this as an organizer, because it's one thing to target politics, right? But what happens when a movement like this moves into the realm of culture?
Yes. First of all, as you said, it's just that for a long time now, there are just no words to describe the atrocities that Israel is carrying out in the Gaza Strip and all of Palestine. Let's not remember what. So I think Francesca Albanese was saying this last week as well. We would not be where we are now if Israel had faced consequences for decades of settler colonialism, military occupation, apartheid, and genocide. And linking this to Eurovision, it is very important that we're at the point right now that, thanks to all the pressure that artists and all different sectors of civil society are saying that they do not want to be part of events where Israel is part of. What the European Broadcasting Union should do is kick Israel out and not allow a genocidal state to be part of this event. There's been lots of talk about how all the money that Israel dedicates to this event, to show itself as another state, to try to cover its crimes against the Palestinian people. But it's very interesting that we're at a point where countries are saying that in light of the European Broadcasting Union not taking any action, that then these countries won't participate. So what we need to keep on doing is pressuring the European Broadcasting Union to not allow this rogue regime, this regime that should not be allowed in any international contest.
So Israel is very aware of the momentum building against it, and we've seen no sign that it has any interest in amending its own behavior in the face of this. I mean, we just came across this headline from the Israeli public broadcaster that read, "We started this war as Ukraine, we will end it as Russia." Do you think that Israel has entered a phase that mirrors what South Africa was during apartheid, where it's cultural boycotts, growing political pressure, and increasingly being treated as this global pariah?
Definitely. We're definitely at the point where Israel is becoming more and more isolated at international level. And as you said, even people that are not necessarily very up to date to the struggle of the Palestinian people do not agree with Israel's actions and do not think that we should normalize relations with such a state. What I also think, and many experts have said this, is that Israeli genocide is totally unsustainable. And actually, Israel needs this military trade with other countries like this. It's horrifying to say this in these terms, but the massacres that Israel is carrying out in all of the Gaza Strip is very expensive. That's why Israel needs to sell this machinery all around the world to be able to cheapen the cost. So that's why it's so important that countries do not contribute to directly finance this genocide. But let's not forget that the US is a direct partner of this genocide, and we need to tackle that as well.
Okay. So as we wrap up, let's talk about Europe and your role in this story. This issue, change is not going to come from the top down. And that's kind of where you come in and people that you work with come in. I saw you last week gave an impassioned speech in the streets of Barcelona.
Comrades, it is very easy to fall into despair when we see the horrifying images that reach us every day from the Gaza Strip and all of Palestine. But what we do matters a great deal. We must carry Palestine with us wherever we go. We must fill our balconies with Palestinian flags.
Do you sense that this is real? That this could be a deeper shift where these European governments and institutions actually are forced to respond to the pressure from their citizens?
I think we have the responsibility to ensure that that is the case. I think there are signals that show that things are starting to change. In Barcelona, for example, we managed, thanks to civil society pressure, we managed to get the Barcelona City Council to put an end to the twinning agreement with Tel Aviv. We also managed to get the Catalan government to close its commercial office in Tel Aviv. So there's definitely signals at a local level and internationally that the institutions are feeling the heat. But it's not, unfortunately, it's not enough because institutions worldwide are still terribly complicit. But this should give us hope that what we're doing is working. But we need to increase the cost. We need to make it totally unsustainable to this day to keep supporting Zionism. Zionism, which, let's remember, it's a form of racism, such as we managed to get the Parliament of Catalonia to recognize some months ago. So what the responsibility as civil society we have is to keep on organizing, to chase down all this complicity that we have at a local level. Unfortunately, Israel is very involved in many different ways in our universities, in the shops we buy, where we work. So it's our responsibility to be informed, to cut down this chains of complicity and to ensure that all of Palestine is free. And we're seeing that this is starting to happen, and we have the responsibility to ensure it does.
Okay. Alys, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you for having me.